Mom! Yeah, that's right. That's right, call for your mom.
Hello there.
Recently, I did a video talking about the good things in the Disney Star Wars movies, and in the comments I saw several people point out that these movies made the prequels look better by comparison. Now this isn't a new statement or point of discussion. Around the time Disney started putting out their Star Wars movies, I've been seeing several people say this. Many claim that it gave them a newfound appreciation for the prequels. They would typically say something like, you know what, maybe they aren't that bad. I saw several videos pop up around 2015, 2016, pointing out the good things about these films. Some of the earliest and most popular were from James Rolfe and Nostalgia Critic, which I think further pushed this narrative and got more people come around to the idea that maybe the prequels weren't that bad. Hell, I was one of them. I was thinking back about the movies and all the good things about them, but then I rewatched them and I realized they're still pretty bad. It's just they're bad for different reasons versus the sequel trilogy. So I want to go through and tell you guys what those reasons are, but more importantly, I want to address and discuss some of the reasons why people do like these movies. So before I get into why these movies are still pretty bad, I want to first talk about why people like them. So when it comes to defending these movies, it really comes down to a few things that I see people bring up over and over again. They either like several of the moments throughout these movies that stuck with them through the years, or they like the ideas and concepts presented in the movies, or they respect George Lucas's vision and what he was going for. I'm serious, ask a fan why they like the prequels, and they usually do one of three things. One, they start listing off all the cool, badass, memorable moments, like remember the pod racing scene? That was awesome. Remember when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan fought Darth Maul and he had that double-sided lightsaber? That was epic. Oh, how about when Anakin kills Windu and joins Palpatine and all the evil shit he has to do? It was so sick. Remember Obi-Wan fighting General Grievous? Or when the Emperor executes Order 66 and all those Jedi start getting killed? It was fucking crazy. Oh, remember the final battle between Anakin and Obi-Wan? That was awesome. It usually goes something like that, and I don't really fault them because that stuff is really cool. Now the second thing they do is usually mention all the ideas and concepts presented in these movies. Stuff like seeing Palpatine rise to power and befriending Anakin turn into the dark side, seeing the Jedi Order at full power going across the galaxy before they're all finally slaughtered, seeing the Clone Wars, and all this stuff on paper sounds pretty awesome, and hell, even some of it is pretty awesome on screen. The concepts and ideas themselves are what they like. And the third and final thing is that fans explain that the movies were made for a purpose. George Lucas had a clear end goal, and he set out to show fans certain events. He wanted to show us the downfall of the Jedi, Anakin's turn to the dark side and becoming Darth Vader, the rise of the Emperor, and so on and so on. There were a bunch of major things that fans expected to finally see, and it's all just one guy's vision, so it's easier to understand and get behind what he was going for. The story wasn't made up in between movies with no direction. There were a list of things that George Lucas wanted to show us and expand upon, and so he did that. But more importantly, Lucas didn't rush these movies out because of a financial incentive. The merchandise alone was more than enough to sustain him and Lucasfilm financially. Not to mention you got the comics, books, and video games. No, he made these movies because he had a clear passion to make them. If he really wanted to capitalize on the Star Wars brand and make some crazy money, he wouldn't have waited 16 years to put out more movies. In comparison, Disney purchased Star Wars in 2012, and within 3 years they started putting out movies, one a year until 2019, and now they're pumping out shows on Disney+. So to fans, you can tell that the motives are completely different. Disney wanted to bank off the brand, while Lucas generally wanted to expand the world he created. And I feel like a lot of fans respect that more than the movies themselves, the man behind it and his intentions. Now I understand and respect all these things. I get where fans are coming from, but there's just one thing. They're still pretty bad movies. Now, I too like several of the ideas presented in these movies. There are several moments that I feel are generally pretty good, and I respect the attempt and intentions of George Lucas. But it's all in a trilogy of movies that are very poorly written, with wooden performances from most of the cast, with bloated runtimes and pacing issues. Now, you can disagree and enjoy them. That's fine. I'm just telling you how I personally feel. And I think that in between all these good, memorable moments that everyone points out are some very awkward performances with some awful lines of dialogue. I mean, most of the lines are so bad that even an actor as charismatic and entertaining as Samuel L. Jackson couldn't make them interesting. And some sections feel just way too long for their own good. You just hit a point where they become boring. Each one of these movies are roughly 2 hours and 20 minutes long, but could easily be around 2 hours if they cut out all the bullshit. And it's all this stuff right here that hurts the interesting ideas and concepts that are presented. Like, how can I get invested in Anakin's turn to the dark side when he comes across as a piece of cardboard? How can I get invested in the relationship between Padme and Anakin when they have no chemistry and just feel so damn awkward around each other? The movies themselves have cool ideas, yes, and there are several really cool moments, but the actual execution and the final product itself isn't that well written and really poorly paced. So this hurts the overall experience and final product. And not to mention George Lucas's over-reliance on CGI makes things look so damn goofy at times. Fun fact, because of George Lucas's tendency to not leave his movies alone, when they released the prequels on Blu-ray, they actually touched up CGI a bit. So they actually look a bit better than I remember from the last time I saw them. He also replaced the Yoda puppet with a full CGI model, but considering there were times in the prequels where Yoda was a CGI model jumping around, I guess this change makes sense. But of course there's one more thing that plays plays a huge part that I didn't mention yet, and that's nostalgia. Because a lot of people grew up with these movies, and these were their first Star Wars movies, or at least the newest ones coming out when they were younger. So they have that personal connection. Trust me, I get that. Hell, I even enjoy Revenge of the Sith, mainly because we get to see Sith Anakin, and I thought that was badass as a kid. It's like the people who saw the original trilogy in the 80s. They have a strong connection to those films, so when they saw the prequels, most of them didn't like it. Meanwhile, kids and preteens around that time did. And guess what? Most of them grew up and here we are now. I guarantee there will be a generation who defend the sequel trilogy the same way fans of the prequel trilogy do. Give it time. Now let's circle the conversation about nostalgia back to me. Like I already mentioned, when I was younger, Revenge of the Sith was my favorite out of the prequels. And all these years later, I still think it's the best one. And it's mainly because things actually happen in the movie. But more importantly, it's the things that we were most excited to see. Anakin turn to the dark side, the Jedi getting slaughtered, Emperor's rise to power, Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting, and finally seeing Anakin become Darth Vader. And not to mention the overall darker tone that the second half of the movie has. And all this stuff is pretty good. But even though I like the movie, I'm not going to pretend that the performances or the writing are that good. And there are still some pacing issues, but it's not as bad here as it is in the first two. I will say that the highs are really high, but its lows are definitely low, though not nearly as low as episode 1 and 2. Easily the best prequel movie, and I still enjoy it. But rewatching it as an adult, I can clearly see that this film has many issues. And it was stuff that I wasn't really aware of until I watched it again. And so I think it's the awesome moments and interesting concepts that people actually remember. So they end up forgetting about how poorly written it all is, and just how awkward, goofy, and sometimes really boring these movies can be.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one. Hopefully it'll work.
So I guess my conclusion after all that is that the sequel trilogy and the prequel trilogy are bad for different reasons. The sequel trilogy is bad because of the creative decisions made that either mess up the lore or establish characters, and the lack of direction they had while making those films, with each movie just kind of changing things that were revealed or set up in the previous, leading to confusion because it showed that they had no idea what they were doing, and no one was on the same page about where to take the films. They didn't know what they were setting up for future films, or if the stuff that they were setting up will even be followed up on, and it showed that Disney was more interested in profiting off the franchise than actually putting out quality products. And the prequels are bad because of their bad writing, wooden performances, and bloated runtime. On several filmmaking fronts, it just kinda fails, but people like the ideas presented and look back on several moments very fondly. But when you look at the execution, it's subpar, let's be honest. But they respect the filmmaker's goal and reasoning for the movies, because you can tell there was passion in them. I actually saw a comment that sums up these trilogies pretty nicely. The original trilogy, when you have a vision, but barely the resources and leeway to bring it to life. The prequel trilogy, when you have a vision, but too much leeway and resources to do what you want. The sequel trilogy, when you have no vision, no plan, but unlimited resources, and decide to play Mad Libs with it. Yeah, it sums it up very nicely. But there's also this pretty accurate comment. This is like comparing a train crash to a plane crash. Yeah, it's definitely a way to look at it. Now, I hope for the fans of the prequel trilogy, you understand where I'm coming from, and I was able to explain myself pretty well. Now, I'm not telling you not to like the films. You can like whatever you want. I'm just listing off the things I've seen from fans, as well as explain why I think they like it, but also explain why I don't think they're that good. So hopefully I didn't come across too harsh. But this is the part of the video where I ask you guys, what do you think about the prequel trilogy? Do you love them? Do you hate them? Leave a comment, let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, go and drop a like on it. And of course, we'll give a nice big shout out to the channel members. You guys, you're the chosen ones. Interested in becoming a channel member? Click the join button down below and check out the perks. If they interest you, consider joining. Or not, it don't matter.
None of this matters.
Wait! And I want you to get out of this office right now.
I'm sorry, Zed.
No way.
You brought
No way.
You brought it on yourself.
I don't want you here.
I'm so
Out.
sorry, George. I didn't think it would go like this.
Out.
Zed, I got your voucher.
Out!